Sometimes life waits until the very end to return what it once took away, and sometimes it does it in the quietest way possible, through a moment that looks small to everyone else but feels like fate to the one standing in it. When 62-year-old Brin Halver raised her hand at a dusty livestock auction in western Montana and offered $1 for an elderly black horse, the room filled with soft laughter. A few men shook their heads. Someone muttered that the woman must have lost her mind. The horse was old, nearly blind, ribs showing through a dull coat, his head hanging low like he had already accepted the end. No one else wanted him. No one else even looked twice, but Brin did. She wasn't looking at his age or his cloudy eyes. She was staring at the faded mark on his left flank, a brand so worn by time it was almost invisible. A circle, a single line cutting through it like a mountain peak. The circle H, her father's brand. Jacob Halver's brand. The same mark burned into the horses of the ranch where her father had worked before he vanished 40 years ago, without a word. The auctioneer slammed his gavel. Sold for $1. Brin felt her hands tremble as the sound echoed through the barn. She didn't explain herself. She didn't argue with the stares. She simply signed the paper, hitched the old horse into her trailer, and drove away, while the mountains watched in silence. The road leading away from the auction yard was narrow and rutted, winding through pine trees and open pasture. Brin drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the edge of the seat like she was grounding herself. In the rearview mirror, the horse shifted his weight carefully, adjusting to the movement. He didn't panic. He didn't fight. He just stood there, patient, tired, alive. That patience spoke to her. She had lived alone for most of her adult life, tucked into the mountains on 20 acres of land her mother had left her. The cabin was small, hand-built, weathered by snow and time. People in town called her a recluse. Brin preferred the word careful. Life had taught her that quiet was safer than noise, and distance hurt less than hope. Her father had disappeared when she was 19. One spring morning he left for work and never came home. No goodbye, no letter, just absence. The sheriff said he probably ran off. Her mother said the same thing, voice flat, eyes hollow. Over time, the truth hardened into something ugly inside Brin. Anger, resentment, a wound that never closed. She stayed in Montana while others left. She built a life that didn't depend on anyone staying. And now, 40 years later, a dying horse with her father's brand had walked back into her life. When she reached the cabin, the sun was dropping behind the ridgeline, painting the sky in gold and ash. Brin took her time unloading the horse, speaking softly as she guided him into the small corral. He moved cautiously, testing the ground with each step, but there was no fear in him, only awareness. "You're safe here," she told him, running a hand along his neck. His coat was rough, his bones sharp beneath the skin. "We'll get you fed. We'll take it slow." The horse lowered his head to the hay like he believed her. Inside the cabin, the familiar scent of wood and coffee wrapped around her. Everything was exactly where she had left it. The table by the window, the old stove, and the wooden box she hadn't opened in months. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down, watching the light fade through the glass. Outside, the mountains stood quiet and unmoving, just as they had the day her father never returned. Brin pulled the wooden box toward her. Inside was her mother's journal, worn soft with age, a bundle of letters tied with string, a few photographs, and at the bottom, folded carefully, a topographical map. Her mother, Grace Halver, had died 3 years earlier. In her final years, memory came and went like weather. She talked about the past more than the present, but never about Jacob, never about the night he disappeared. When Brin asked, Grace's eyes would cloud with something that looked like fear, and she would change the subject. It was only after her death that Brin found the journal hidden deep in an old suitcase lining, preserved and concealed, protected. Brin opened it now to a page she knew by heart. March 15, 1985. Jacob came home quiet tonight. He barely touched his food. I know that look in his eyes. He's carrying something heavy, something he won't share. Her mother's handwriting was careful and small, like she had chosen every word with intention. March 28, 1985. Survey maps. He folded them quickly when he saw me. He's never hidden his work from me before. Then the entry that always made Brin's chest tighten. April 3, 1985. He found something he shouldn't have. They know. He told me tonight that if anything happens to him, I must protect Brin. Keep her away from this, I promised. The last entry before he vanished. April 10, 1985. Jacob didn't come home last night. The sheriff came. I told them he left. That's the first lie of my life. God forgive me. A location in the high country was marked with a small X. Beside it, in her father's handwriting, were 2 words, last camp. She had stared at that map for 3 years, afraid of what it might lead to, afraid of reopening wounds that had never healed. But the horse had changed something. That faded brand had turned fear into resolve. A knock came at the door, sharp and unexpected. Brin stood and reached for her jacket as headlights swept across the cabin wall. She stepped outside to see a familiar truck parked near the fence. Sheriff Ben Coulter climbed out slowly, hat low on his brow, gray hair catching the porch light. He had known Brin since she was a child. He had known her father, too. "Evening, Brin," he said. "Evening, Ben." He glanced toward the corral where the old horse stood quietly. "Saw you at the auction today." "I figured." That brand stirred up some talk. Brin crossed her arms. "I didn't buy him for talk." Ben nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Some folks remember Jacob, and not all of them remember him kindly. "My father wasn't a thief," she said, her voice firm. "I never believed he was," Ben replied. "But if you start digging around those mountains, asking questions, you might wake things better left alone." Brin met his eyes. "I've been asleep for 40 years. Ben sighed. "Your mother came to see me once, before she got sick, asked me to promise I'd keep you safe if you ever went looking for answers. And I'm trying to keep that promise." Brin looked past him, toward the dark outline of the mountains. "Tomorrow, I'm heading north." Ben handed her a card. "If you get into trouble, you call me, day or night." She took it. "I will." When he drove away, the night settled in heavy and quiet. Brin stood on the porch, listening to the wind move through the pines. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. She went back inside and began laying out supplies on the floor. Sleeping bag, tent, food, rope, first aid kit, grain for the horse. She worked methodically, like she always did when her thoughts threatened to run ahead of her. Later, she stepped outside and brushed the horse slowly, thinking through names. When she finished, she rested her forehead against his neck. "Tracker," she said softly. "That's what I'll call you." The horse breathed out through his nose, warm and steady. Before dawn, Brin saddled him and packed her gear. The sky was pale when they set out, moving north along a trail that climbed into the high country. She didn't know what waited at the last camp, but she knew one thing. Whatever her father had tried to protect had survived long enough to call her back, and this time she wasn't turning away. The trail narrowed as Brin and Tracker climbed higher into the mountains, the air thinning with every step. Pines grew closer together, their branches heavy with the promise of early snow. The old horse moved carefully, placing each hoof with thought, trusting Brin's guidance more than his fading sight. She spoke to him often, not because he needed it, but because she did. By midday, they reached a cold stream cutting through stone. Brin dismounted and let Tracker drink while she ate a small meal. The silence felt deep here, the kind that pressed against the ears. As she refilled her canteen, a sound broke through it, hoofbeats. Not hers. She straightened slowly, one hand resting on her rifle. A rider appeared around the bend, a younger man on a well-kept sorrel horse. He raised a hand in greeting and stopped at a respectful distance. "Afternoon," he said. "Didn't expect to see anyone up this way so late in the season." "Neither did I," Brin replied. "Kyle Brennan," he said. "I guide hunters through this country." Brin Halver, Recognition flickered across his face. "You're the woman up on the old logging road." "So I'm told." Kyle's eyes moved briefly to Tracker. "That's a brave choice for these trails. He's stronger than he looks." Kyle nodded. "Rock slide about 10 miles north. Trail shifted last spring. Might want to lead him through." "I will." He hesitated, then said, "If you need shelter, there's an old line shack east of here."
"Not much, but it'll keep the wind off."
"Thank you." Kyle tipped his hat and rode on, disappearing into the trees.
Brin waited until the sound of his horse faded before moving again. Encounters like that reminded her how exposed she was. People noticed things. They remembered names. That night she made camp just off the trail. No fire, no light. She ate cold food and slept with one eye open, the stars sharp above her. Tracker stood close, his presence steady. By morning, frost covered the ground. The rock slide Kyle warned her about was worse than she expected. Loose stone shifted underfoot, and Brin led Tracker slowly, testing every step. It took nearly an hour to cross. When they reached solid ground again, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. As the day wore on, the forest changed. Trees thinned, wind cut sharper. The map in her pocket grew warmer with use as she checked it again and again. Near dusk, she found an old campsite. The fire ring was nearly swallowed by pine needles, but it was there. So were the remains of a crude shelter. Then she saw it carved into the bark of a tree. J.H. 1985. Her knees weakened. Her father had been here. She searched the site carefully, moving stones, checking rotted wood. In a hollow post, capped and hidden, she found oilcloth. Inside was a photograph. Her father stood smiling beside two men. One was younger, sharp-eyed. On the back, in her father's hand, were the words, "Last day at the ranch." May 1985. The name Raymond Voss was written beneath one face. Brin didn't know the man, but something about him made her stomach turn. She wrapped the photograph carefully and packed it away. The next morning, clouds rolled in fast. Snow began to fall by noon, light at first, then heavier. Brin pushed on, knowing storms up here could trap her for days. By late afternoon, she reached a small, half-collapsed cabin. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. She brought Tracker under the overhang, rubbed him down, and settled inside. That night, the wind screamed through the trees. She woke before dawn to silence. Too much silence. Outside, fresh boot prints marked the snow near the cabin. Someone had been there while she slept. Brin checked her rifle and packed quickly. Whoever was following her was close now. As she rode on, the terrain opened into Alpine Basin. A frozen lake lay ahead, surrounded by ancient spruce. Her heart pounded. The place on the map. The last camp. She dismounted and searched the grove, fingers numb, breath shallow. Every tree looked the same until she spotted a blaze cut too high to be accidental. JH. At the base of the tree, hidden beneath years of debris, she found a metal box sealed tight. Her hands shook as she lifted it. Then engines roared. Snowmobiles crested the ridge, spreading wide as they descended. Men dismounted, armed and deliberate. A voice carried across the snow. "Miss Halver, we just want the box." An older man stepped forward, calm, controlled. "Your father made a mess," he said. "I cleaned it up. Let's not repeat history." Raymond Voss. Brin raised her rifle. "You killed him." "I did my job." Shots rang out. Bark exploded. Brin fired back, ducking behind trees. One snowmobile erupted in flames. Chaos followed. She grabbed the box and ran deeper into the grove, bullets cracking behind her. Tracker followed, steady despite the noise. A helicopter thundered overhead. Brin dove into a creek bed, sliding down icy banks. The box clutched to her chest. The high walls hid her from the air. She ran until her lungs burned. In a rocky overhang, she stopped long enough to break the seal. Inside were photographs, samples, documents, proof, and a letter. Her father's words blurred as tears filled her eyes. He had hidden everything. trusted her to find it. Voices echoed nearby. Brin packed the box tight and moved again. This wasn't just about answers anymore. This was about finishing what her father started. The creek bed twisted through rock and ice, its banks steep enough to hide Brin and Tracker from the helicopter circling above. Snow soaked through her boots as she pushed forward, breath burning in her chest. Tracker followed without hesitation, trusting her voice and the pull of the reins more than his failing eyes. Behind them, shouts echoed as the men spread out, confident, patient, certain time was on their side. Brin knew this country better than they ever would. She led Tracker beneath overhanging rock and through narrow cuts where machines could not follow. When the creek bent sharply east, she made a choice. She fired 2 shots into the air, then veered south, drawing attention away from the hidden spur that climbed toward a ridge. The men took the bait. Engines roared. Boots pounded snow. Minutes later, the sound faded. Brin didn't stop until her legs shook. She guided Tracker into a thick stand of spruce where the snow lay undisturbed and the wind died. There, sheltered by branches older than memory, she opened the metal box again. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs of illegal mining equipment carved into protected land, mineral samples sealed and labeled in her father's hand, survey maps marked with precision, payment records, names, dates, and at the bottom, the letter. She read it slowly, every word settling into her bones. Her father had known he might die. He had trusted her mother to protect the truth until Brin was ready. Grace had carried that burden alone for decades, letting her daughter believe a lie so she could live. Brin pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes.
"I'm here, Dad," she whispered.
I finished the trail. A sound snapped her back. A single bootstep. Close. Brin turned, rifle raised. A woman stood between the trees, hands open, breath visible in the cold air. She wore winter gear and carried herself with calm authority. "Easy," the woman said. "My name's Sandra Conan-Cade. I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency." Brin didn't lower the rifle. Sandra nodded toward the box. Jacob Halver filed a report in 1985. It disappeared when he did. I've been looking for it for 15 years. "How did you find me?" "Sheriff Coulter called our office when you bought the horse. He suspected what you were doing. I followed the trail." Brin studied her face. There was no fear there, only urgency. "They're coming," Brin said. "I know," Sandra replied. 2 snowmobiles, a helicopter, and a man named Raymond Voss. That settled it. They moved fast. Sandra took the box, securing it inside her pack. "My snowmobile is hidden near the ridge.
If I can get this out, federal agents will flood this area within hours."
"And me? You know these mountains," Sandra said.
You can disappear." Brin looked at Tracker, standing steady beside her. The old horse lifted his head at her voice, ears turning. "I'll draw them away," Brin said. "He's distinctive. They'll follow us." Sandra hesitated. "That's dangerous. So is letting them get this." They didn't waste time arguing. Brin mounted Tracker and rode hard into the open basin, firing again to make sure she was seen. Within seconds, engines screamed to life. The helicopter swung low. She ran. Tracker moved with surprising speed, hooves finding solid ground where Brin barely saw it. She led them across slopes too steep for machines, through trees so tight men had to dismount. She crossed streams again and again, breaking her trail. The chase ended in a wide meadow. Men stepped out from both sides. Raymond Voss stood at the center, calm as ever. "You're stubborn," he said, "just like your father." Brin brought Tracker to a stop. She didn't raise the rifle this time. "You lost," she said. "The evidence is gone." Voss smiled thinly. "We'll find it." "No," Brin said. "You won't," a voice boomed from the ridge. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Men in dark jackets poured from the trees. Snowmobiles were surrounded. The helicopter lifted, veered, and fled. Sheriff Coulter stepped forward, breath heavy, eyes locked on Brin. "You okay?" he asked. "I am now." Voss didn't resist when they cuffed him. As they led him away, he glanced back once, something unreadable in his eyes. The storm cleared by morning. Federal agents secured the area. Sandra returned, her face pale with relief. "The evidence is already on its way to Denver," she said. "Your father's work is airtight." Brin felt something inside her finally loosen. Days later, they found Jacob Halver's remains in a ravine not far from the last camp. Time and snow had hidden him, but the mountains had not erased him. His wedding ring was still there. Brin stood quietly as they lifted him out. "I found you," she whispered. The trial came fast and loud, carried by headlines and cameras. Brin testified calmly, clearly. Raymond Voss was convicted of murder. His journals exposed decades of corruption. Companies fell, officials were charged, land was reclaimed. Justice came late, but it came whole. Jacob Halver was laid to rest beside Grace under a clear Montana sky. Brin placed the pocket watch between their headstones. "You kept your promises," she said. "Both of you." Life settled into something new after that. The high country where Jacob once worked was designated protected wilderness in his name. Brin attended the dedication quietly, standing at the edge while officials spoke. She didn't need applause. The land itself was the reward. Tracker lived out his days in peace, grazing beneath the same mountains that had carried his rider home. Brin rode him gently, often without destination, just following trails her father once mapped. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Brin stood on her porch, watching the light turn the peaks gold. The wind carried the scent of pine and old earth. For 40 years, the truth had waited. All it took was one mountain woman, one forgotten horse, and the courage to follow a faded mark into the past. Brin Halver smiled softly. She was finally free.